Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. I'm sharing some research on community gardens. So this is different from the allotment gardens. We have already heard from some of the colleagues. These are compared gardens in Europe and North America. There is a knowledge gap in the literature that most studies community gardens are small case studies or small numbers of case studies, so therefore we wanted to contribute a transnational bigger N study on the question, how are community gardens organized as spaces of collective action in different geographical contexts. We selected 51 community gardens in cities with more than 40,000 inhabitants in the USA, in Canada, in the United Kingdom on the one side, and Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. So we had the hypothesis that there is a difference between German-speaking countries and English-speaking countries because of the different traditions in legal systems and land ownership. For these gardens, we did research on websites, blogs, bylaws, different articles, so whatever kind of documents and information we could identify. And I will present you then a cluster analysis based on Ostrom's design principles. You might know Eleanor Ostrom and her work on common pool resources. And based on many empirical studies, she and many other colleagues defined design principles for stable, or you could also say sustainable use of common pool resources, so commonly used natural resources. And the first design principle is that clearly defined boundaries are necessary. So in a geographical sense, either fences or walls that show where does the garden end and where does it start, but also socially. So who is allowed to use the vegetables, the fruits grown in this garden, and who is not. The second one is that there should be congruence of appropriation and provision, so that there should be a balance between what you give and what you take out. And this refers to the social group, but also to the interaction between nature and people. The third one is collective choice arrangements, that those people using the land can also define the rules and co-decide on how they want to use and manage the garden. And if people do not stick to these rules, it's important to have an effective monitoring by communities members. So the people using the community garden should also be those monitoring the rules and how people stick to the rules, but also monitoring the situation of the garden and the people using them. And if there are people not sticking to the rules, it's helpful to have graduate sanctions, and there should be cheap and easy to apply conflict resolution mechanisms, and self-governance recognized by higher level authorities like the city or other higher level governments, acknowledging that these gardens are self-organized by the users. And the last design principle refers to nested organizations, so that for more complex common goods, it might be helpful to have not only a single organization, but multiple organizations nested in a multi-level governance system, so higher level governance coordinating more several locally self-organized units. So how does this play out in the gardens that we analyzed? What you see here is the number of gardens in the different countries that we have included in our study. And the year of existence, what becomes evident is that USA has the oldest gardens in our sample. This is due to the history and the idea of community gardens originating from this part of the world. Here we have the results divided for German-speaking countries and Anglo-Saxon areas, so the English-speaking countries. And we see that there are, apart from the years of existence, so that the Anglo-Saxon community gardens are older than the German-speaking countries, as we have already seen on the previous slide. It's also a significant difference in how the land is used, where in German-speaking countries, there are more commonly used areas. In the Anglo-Saxon countries, the focus is on individually used plots within the community garden. And another significant difference is that in the Anglo-Saxon gardens, we have more often waiting lists. So they exclude people because the number of people interested in using the garden is too high. And another difference, again, is that participation possible without own plot or membership. This is something that you rather find in German-speaking countries. So the cluster analysis that I announced resulted in 3 different types of gardens. And we have a closer look here. What's the difference? I will pick out only some aspects. So there is one type that is called the participation garden that is really open to everyone. So whoever is interested in accessing this garden or using this garden can participate. So there is no membership, it's mostly common areas, and of course there is no membership fee and no fixed number of users. A very different type of garden is the closed garden groups. This is only for members and they have to pay a fee. There are very clear rules. These are codified. So there are documents where you find these rules, and there are clear numbers of people participating in these gardens. And then there is a third type, which is a kind of a mixture of the first 2 types. And if we look now at the geographical distribution, we see that the Canadian and US gardens are mostly in type 2 or type 3, whereas Austrian, Swiss and German gardens you find all in these countries, in the German-speaking countries, you find all different types of gardens. So there is more diversity in the German-speaking countries. So overall, we see high accordance with Ostrom design principles. Only the first principle on clear boundaries seems to be more complex in community gardens. So we see gardens that have very clearly regulated access and binding membership, so excluding people not being members from the access to this green space in the city. But we also see many gardens, particularly in the German-speaking countries in Europe, that are very open. So everyone is welcome and everyone can participate. And there we have open access to the gardens. And in some cases, some rules on who is allowed to use the harvest, but in other gardens also open access to the harvest. So not only entering the garden, but also being able to harvest fruits and vegetables in these areas. And in terms of the organization, we see singly organized gardens, but also gardens that are part of higher level organizations. So city administration defining some general rules that then are implemented in lower level gardens where they have some degree of self-organization, but also have coordination by higher level organizations. So we have found rather European and North American divide than an English and German-speaking countries divide, with much more diversity in European countries. There is no blueprint, so it seems that all the individual gardens have to design for themselves whether they want to have more open or more closed boundaries. And in terms of COVID-19, which was, of course, after our study, but from observation here in Vienna, I can say that, and in Austria in general, we see a growing demand for local food and also a growing demand for access to land, particularly in cities. And therefore, I propose as indicator the share of population with access to green space, and in the case of urban gardens, also to access to land where they can grow their local food. And I would argue that this could also be an instrument for inclusiveness and social justice, so to make sure that also disadvantaged groups have access to community gardens, either by low fees or even by open access options, as we have seen them in Germany, in Switzerland or Austria. And I would like to conclude with these thoughts on COVID-19. Thank you.